Picture this with me. You have a credit card with a $5,000 limit. You buy $2,000 worth of furniture. You are not broke. You are not reckless. You have the cash sitting in the bank and you intend to pay the whole thing off. The bill arrives, you open it, and you pay the full balance immediately. No interest, no late fee, no drama. In every ordinary human sense, you behaved exactly the way a responsible borrower is supposed to behave. Then 3 days later, your phone lights up. Your credit score has dropped 25 points. Now, if you have never had that happen to you, you would assume there must be some mistake. Maybe fraud, maybe a reporting error, maybe a bug. Because in the normal mind, if you paid in full and on time, you should be rewarded or at least left alone. That is not how this system works. And one of the costliest things in personal finance is not ignorance of some glamorous investing secret. It is misunderstanding the plumbing of a system you use every month and assuming it works on common sense. It does not. That is the mother line of this whole story. Your credit score is not a live feed of your virtue. It is a lagging snapshot of your messiest moment. Once you understand that, the whole structure becomes much easier to manage. Most people have been trained to think the due date is the sacred date. That is what they grew up hearing. Pay by the due date, avoid interest, avoid late fees, stay responsible. And to be fair, if your goal is simply not to lose money to the bank, that advice is correct. But if your goal is to optimize the number the algorithm sees, then the due date is not the whole story, not even close, because the bureaus are not sitting there watching a little live camera feed of your bank account and saying, "Ah, yes, she paid the balance yesterday, let us update the score this morning." Number, that is not how the machine is built. The machine is bureaucratic, it is slow, it is mechanical. It does not watch your life like a movie. It receives photographs. That is the key image I want fixed in your mind. A credit score is not a movie. It is a stack of photographs, and unfortunately the photographer usually shows up before you clean the room. That is exactly why so many perfectly responsible people get punished for doing the obvious thing. They wait for the bill, they pay the bill, they feel morally clean, then the algorithm says something else happened, and the algorithm is not looking at your intention, it is looking at the picture it was handed. Now, let me walk you through the timeline, because once you see the timeline, the entire mystery disappears. Suppose your billing cycle runs from the 1st to the 30th. For those 30 days, you use the card normally: groceries, gas, dinner, furniture, maybe a plane ticket, maybe some household bills. The balance goes up as the month moves along. Then the 30th arrives. That is the statement closing date. That is the moment that matters. The bank closes the cycle, generates the statement, and freezes that number onto the PDF bill. That number, the balance sitting there on the statement closing date, is the number that usually gets sent to the credit bureaus. Not the number after you pay 3 weeks later. Not the number that reflects how responsible you feel. The number in the snapshot, that is what gets hard-coded into your report for the month. Then comes the due date, often something like 20 to 25 days later. So now the trap becomes obvious. You may have had a $3,000 balance sitting on the statement date. That $3,000 gets reported. Then you pay it all in full before the due date. Wonderful. You avoided interest, you avoided late fees, but the bureaus still receive the photograph of the $3,000 balance. They are not grading the cleaned room. They are grading the room before you cleaned it. That is why the score falls. The system is not calling you irresponsible because you missed a payment. It is calling you risky because the photograph shows high utilization. That distinction matters, because once you understand the distinction, you stop feeling confused and start taking control. This is what I mean when I say the system is not broken. It is bureaucratic. It is not following your real-time life. It is reporting yesterday's news. You are living in the present. Your score is often living on a 30-day delay. And if you do not understand who controls the timing of the photograph, then the bank gets to define your credit reputation based on the worst-looking day of the month, instead of the truth of how you actually manage money. That is a bad arrangement. So let us fix it. The solution is what people sometimes call the statement date hack. I do not really care for the word hack because it makes this sound sneaky or exotic. It is not. It is simply timing. It is understanding the mechanism and refusing to let the mechanism misrepresent you. The principle is simple. Do not wait for the statement to be generated and then pay the balance down before the statement is generated. If the statement closes on the 30th, then ideally 3 or 4 days before that, you go in and reduce the balance to something very small. Then when the statement gets created, the photograph shows almost no usage. And that is the number that flies to Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Then later, by the due date, you pay off whatever tiny amount was left. Same card, same spending, same discipline. Very different photograph. That is the entire game. Now, some people hear this and assume the difference is minor. They think, well, if I report $1,000 instead of $10, surely that is only a couple of points. That is not how this scoring works. You are underestimating the sensitivity of the machine. Credit scoring is not just about absolute numbers. It is about thresholds. Cross the wrong threshold and the score can fall much faster than a sensible person would expect. So let us talk about utilization, because this is where most of the pain comes from. In the FICO framework, payment history is the largest category. Fine, that makes sense. Did you pay or not? But the next largest piece, around 30%, is amounts owed, and a massive share of that is driven by credit utilization. That means nearly 1/3 of your financial reputation can be distorted simply by how much of your available credit appears to be used in the photograph the bureaus receive. That is not a side issue. That is the pressure point. The math itself is not sophisticated. Current balance divided by total limit, that is all if you owe $500 on a $1,000 card. Your utilization is 50%. The formula is simple. The consequences are not, because the scoring model does not treat all utilization levels equally. It treats them like risk zones. Under 10% looks excellent. Under 30% generally still looks acceptable. Cross above 30% and the algorithm starts getting less comfortable. Cross above 50% and the machine begins treating you as someone under real pressure. Approach 100% and you are no longer just using credit. You are signaling distress. That is what the score sees. Not your savings account, not your intention to pay, not the fact that the furniture purchase was temporary and fully funded, only the ratio. And this applies in 2 ways. First, overall utilization across all cards combined. Second, individual card utilization. That second one catches a lot of people. They think, well, I have $50,000 in total available credit, so one card being maxed out should not matter that much. Wrong. If one small card is sitting at 90% or 100%, the algorithm notices. The source calls this the panic zone, and I think that is the right label. A single card screaming distress can drag the whole score even if your total portfolio of credit lines looks decent overall. That is why people with very strong scores can still get hit hard after putting a vacation or furniture purchase on one lower limit card. The machine is not reading your narrative, it is reading your ratios. Fay Felicite, Fay Turn 39, File 0 Fay. Now here's the good news. Utilization, in the most common model people still deal with. FICO 8 has no memory. That is a very important sentence, no memory. A missed payment can linger like a ghost for years. Utilization usually does not. If you reported 90% one month and 5% the next month, the older ugly photograph does not keep poisoning the score forever. The new photograph replaces the old one. That is why this part of the system is so powerful if you understand it. You are not repairing some permanent scar. You are correcting a current data point. That means you can often repair a utilization problem in 30 days or less. Think about how rare that is in personal finance. Most financial mistakes take years to undo. This one can be corrected on the next reporting cycle. Now, naturally, once people hear this, they tend to overcorrect. They say, fine. Then I will just report 0 every month. No balance, no utilization. Perfect. Right? Wrong again. This is one of the most stubborn myths in the whole credit world. 0 is not always optimal. You would think it should be. If low is good, 0 must be perfect. But the algorithm is not trying to reward purity. It is trying to evaluate how you handle active credit. If every single card reports 0 month after month, you begin to look like a ghost. You are not demonstrating that you can use credit and manage it. You are demonstrating something closer to non-use. That is why the highest scorers often do not report zero. They report very little. A few percentage points, roughly 4 to 7% according to the source S framing of top score behavior. And in many practical cases even closer to 1% on one card while the rest sit at zero. This is the sweet spot because it tells the model two things at once. Yes, this person actively uses credit. And no, this person is nowhere near stressed by it. Fay file site Fay turn 39 file 0 Fay. That is why the all zero except one method exists. AIO, you take several cards, you pay almost all of them down to zero before their statement dates. Then you leave one card with a tiny reported balance, maybe $10, maybe $20, maybe around 1% of the limit. Not to carry debt, not to pay interest, only to let the photograph show controlled activity instead of total absence. That is a very different thing, and this is where people trip over language. Reporting a balance is not the same as carrying a balance. You can let the statement show $10 and still pay zero interest if you pay that $10 by the due date. That is the part people keep missing. They hear leave a balance and think, Tom, now you want me to pay interest. Number, that would be idiotic. The whole point is to report the small amount, then pay it by the due date. You are threading the needle between the reporting date and the interest date. That is the game. Now let us talk about execution, because the theory is not the hard part. The hard part is people trusting autopay to do a job. Autopay was never designed to do. Autopay is built to save you from being late. That is useful. It is not built to optimize your score. If your autopay is set to pay the statement balance on the due date, then you are already too late for utilization purposes. You are paying the bill after the photographer came and went. So if you want to manage this actively, you have to know your statement closing dates, not just your due dates. The due date is the day the bank wants its money. The statement date is the day the bureaus get their photograph. Those are different jobs, and you need both dates. So the first thing you do is information gathering. Pull up each card, find the statement closing date, not the due date, the closing date. Sometimes you need to open an old PDF statement to find it because the apps love emphasizing the due date and often hide the billing. Cycle details deeper in the account. Dig for it. Once you find it, put it on your calendar, recurring monthly reminder. If the card closes on the 15th, set a reminder for the 12th or 13th. That buffer matters because payments do not always post instantly. Then, when the reminder hits, you look at the balance and do the math. If the current balance is $800 and you want the statement to show $10, then you pay $790 before the closing date. Now, the balance sitting there when the statement is generated is tiny. That is what gets reported. Then later, when the due date arrives, you pay the remaining $10. That is the operational rhythm. Not complicated, just deliberate. And here is an important point. You do not need to live like this every month forever unless you are actively grooming your score for a mortgage. An auto loan or some other major credit event for most of the year, just keeping utilization naturally low is enough. Under 10% or 20% paid on time, no stress, fine. But when you know you need every possible point in the next 30 to 60 days, then you can pull this lever hard and cleanly. That is the value a lever, not a religion. Now, there is another trap here, and I want to cover it because the source is right to warn about it. Credit cycling. This is where cleverness becomes suspicious. Suppose you have a $1,000 limit. You spend $1,000, then before the statement closes, you pay it off. Then you spend another $1,000. Then you pay it again. Then you spend another $1,000 again. From your perspective, maybe you think you are being efficient. You are using the card heavily, paying it down, using it again, all while keeping the statement utilization low. From the bank's perspective, you are pushing $3,000 of activity through a line they only intended to expose themselves to for $1,000. That looks strange, sometimes very strange. Risk departments do not always interpret that as harmless enthusiasm. They can interpret it as money laundering risk, bust-out risk, or misuse of the approved exposure level. You think you are outsmarting utilization. They think you are trying to run a volume pattern they never approved. That is why if you constantly need to pay a card multiple times just to keep using it, the answer is usually not more clever timing. The answer is ask for a higher credit limit. If they raise your limit to $20,000 and you spend $2,000 in a month, you are now at 10% naturally. Suddenly you are no longer trying to squeeze giant spending through a tiny pipe. You are working with the system instead of against it. That is healthier. Now let us look a little further ahead, because the present scoring world is still mostly dominated by snapshot models like FICO 8. But newer versions such as FICO 10T are more interested in trended data. That means instead of only caring about the current photograph, they begin looking at the pattern across many photographs over time. That matters if month after month you are running yourself to the edge and then clearing balances at the last second. The trended data models may eventually notice that behavior pattern, even if your snapshot looks clean. Now, the adoption of those newer models remains uneven and slow, so the statement date strategy still matters very much in the real world today. But I want you to understand the direction over time. The system will likely become harder to game cosmetically because it will know more history. That does not make the current strategy useless. It just means you should not build your whole life around the assumption that one optical fix solves a genuinely stressed credit profile. You still want to be truly low risk, not merely photographed that way. Now let me give you one more defensive principle, because this one is another quiet place people damage themselves. Do not close old cards casually. People love simplifying their finances and congratulating themselves for closing unused credit cards. They think they are cleaning house. What they are often really doing is shrinking the denominator in the utilization math. If you close a card with a $10,000 limit and a zero balance, you just remove $10,000 of available credit from your system. Your balances on the other cards may be unchanged, but now the utilization ratio across your total lines becomes higher instantly because the limit pool got smaller. That is why old cards with no annual fee can be valuable ballast. Leave them open. Put one tiny recurring charge on them if needed. A Netflix subscription, a software renewal, something trivial. Set it to auto-pay. Let the cards stay alive and keep supporting your overall utilization profile. That is not clutter, that is structure. And structure is what wins here. Now, let us step back and put the whole protocol together clearly. First, stop treating the due date as the only date that matters. For interest? Yes. For your score? No. Second, find your statement closing date for each card. That is the photographer S date. Third, calculate your target utilization. Under 30% is generally fine. Under 10% is much better. Around 1% on one card with the rest at zero can be ideal when you are optimizing aggressively. 3 or 4 days before the statement closes, manually pay down the balance so that the statement reports the number you actually want the bureaus to see. Fifth, after the statement closes, pay the tiny remaining balance by the due date and pay no interest. That is the two-step process. You decouple your actual spending from the number the bureau's record. That is the advantage. Now, I want to end with something broader, because this topic is really not about one trick. It is about understanding that the financial world is built on rules, and most people only bother learning the rules about penalties after they have already paid them. Late fee rules, interest rules, overdraft rules. Fine, but the reporting rules are just as powerful. The data rules matter, the calendar rules matter, the photograph matters, and once you learn how the picture is taken, you stop being the person who pays on time and still gets confused when the score drops. You become the person managing the photograph itself. That is a completely different position to occupy. You are no longer reacting to the algorithm. You are directing what the algorithm sees. That is how adults use systems, not by complaining they are unfair, by learning exactly where the levers are and then pulling them on purpose. So if you need the score in the next 30 to 60 days for a mortgage, an auto loan, an apartment, whatever it is, do not just keep hoping your good habits are being translated properly. Manage the snapshot. That is the whole edge. And once you understand that, you will realize your credit score is not merely a judgment, it is a photograph. And photographs, unlike morality, are all about timing.